So I presume the Americans agreed to something they didn't really understood what was agreed upon. And of course, I'm not sure they know exactly who is controlling what sanctions, because the level of incompetence and arrogance in the current administration is staggering, as we know. And hence, you wouldn't be surprised that those people don't even know what they're talking about.
Today, I'm joined by Professor of Geography and Political Economy at the University of Oxford, Vlad Mykhnenko. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Isaac. Thank you for inviting me.
Earlier today, Macron said sanctions would not be lifted in exchange for Russia taking part of a Black Sea ceasefire, presumably doing so on behalf of the Coalition of the Willing, meeting today in Paris. Where does this leave the ceasefire?
It's a great question. I also noticed that I think yesterday one of the major papers also quoted an anonymous Brussels official who swore actually at the idea of lifting sanctions on Russia, which could be vaguely translated as 5 chance for that happening. So it looks like the deal that the Americans apparently had with Russians in Riyadh 3 days ago wasn't really a deal that we thought it would be. So it is quite confusing to understand what's going on, because what we had officially is the American delegation gave us one set of a document that they purportedly signed with the Ukrainian delegation, and then very similar document that they presumably agreed to the Russian delegation. And the two documents had little differences, but more or less they were the same. Effectively, a no-conditional ceasefire in the Black Sea for 30 days for the commercial naval operations. And then the following day, we've received a longer list of demands from Moscow saying that they agreed only upon the conditions of the following. And that meant that they wanted one of the major banks to be lifted out of sanctions and be included back to SWIFT, an international bank transaction system. They wanted also for several operators, not only the agriculture producers, but also fertilizer producers and also fishing companies, to be allowed to sell and export things abroad via the Black Sea route. And the list goes on and goes on. A lot of those sanctions, as we know, are actually not American sanctions, but European sanctions. SWIFT is based in Belgium. And so effectively, it looks like the non-conditional deal was not a deal, and the conditional deal is conditioned upon European Union agreeing to lift sanctions, but the European Union was not part of the negotiations, and rightly so. European officials, anonymously, but President Macron of France formally said that that's not going to happen. So it looks like the deal is off.
Assuming it was still on, who would benefit most from the ceasefire, do you think?
I think it's important to look at the broader context, right? Ukraine is a very open economy, and foreign trade is a significant portion of Ukraine's economic activity. So it ties to international trade quite significantly. There are various measurements, but if you take the foreign trade totally and compare it to the size of the economy, last year Ukraine's GDP was the foreign trade was about 78% of Ukraine's GDP. So that's almost all of output was linked to the international trade. The UK's figure is 66%. France's figure is 71, Norway 80, Germany 83. So Ukraine is in the high end of highly open economies, and trade is important. And of course, exports are generating foreign currency. Ukraine needs to pay for weapons in dollars, euros, and other currency, and that helps to stabilize the economy. Obviously, helps to support employment, helps to continue maintaining the trade routes and relationships. So foreign trade is important. That's one point. The second point is that over the last 30 years, probably 60% of Ukrainian merchandise trade, i.e. goods, right? Not services, but goods, the stuff that's been transported by various means of transport, 60% of Ukrainian trade were due to agriculture products and metal products. So effectively, wheat and steel are the two biggest commodity exports that Ukraine have. Those are bulky, heavy items, as everybody can imagine. And hence, maritime route, merchant navy is an important part. Yeah, so the maritime transport links is an important part of exporting those bulky, heavy items like wheat and steel. And so when the war started, or the full-scale invasion began in 2022, Ukrainian foreign trade exports collapsed by 35%. They used to be 68 billion in 2021. They collapsed to $44 billion in 2022. 2023, they collapsed even further by another 18%. By 2024, it went up by 15%. So last year's exports were 60% to the pre-war level, but were up from 2022. And that was without any deal with Russia, right? So something happened in 23, 24 that allowed Ukrainian exporters of plant products, agricultural products, food, and steel to export stuff. A lot of it, or some of it, was done through railway links via Poland. So some exports were rerouted to the European Union via railway, through railway hubs. Not a lot of capacity exists because railway links and railway tracks are there, and there is a congestion anyway. So Black Sea is the only maritime route, and that is why it is important. But something happened in 22-23 that allowed Ukrainians to export more stuff without having any ceasefire with Russia, and that was the actual activities of the Ukrainian non-existent navy, but actually existing navy and army and special forces that managed to get rid of the Russian Black Sea fleet and pushed it in the very eastern corner of the Black Sea to Novorossiysk and other ports in Russia proper, but also managed to get rid of the attacks on Ukrainian merchant navy that kind of goes through the Bosphorus and then follows closely Bulgarian, Romanian coastal line and gets to Odessa and other ports like Mykolaiv and Charkiv and Yuzhny as well. So until now, there was some significant actually amount of Black Sea trade done by Ukrainians, and exporting routes were reestablished through effectively informal enforcement mechanism. If you hit our ships, we'll hit yours, and that's kind of was holding up more or less. Of course, Russians did attack port infrastructure in Odessa and other ports. Ukrainians do attack oil depots and oil refineries in the Black Sea coast region to prevent Russians exporting oil. But without those, apart from those few excesses, more or less, there's been quite a lot of trade. And as I said, Ukraine exported $42 billion worth of exports last year, up from 22-23. So it is an important mechanism. If you have a formal agreement, probably is better than an informal one. But even without it, the world is not starving because they cannot access Ukrainian grain.
So outside of the White House, then, it must seem somewhat strange to be offering such, and especially considering it's America, offering lifting of European sanctions on Russia for an area in which there is, if not an official ceasefire, at least a very light presence of Russian Navy and military action against Ukraine. So why do you have any insight why Trump might have been willing to consider such concessions in an area that is not seeing a lot of fighting in the first place?
The names of the American negotiators that were released by the White House, the people who were in Riyadh, were not very well known to me. I have been following this process for quite some time now. So they are relatively inexperienced or relatively junior or previously junior, now senior people who haven't had that experience of negotiating with the Russians. Whereas on the Russian side, you had 70 plus, 75 plus aged individuals, most of them with the KGB experience, presumably following presumably learning the demands that they memorized in the Kremlin, and spending 12 hours with American counterparts, effectively bullying them in, throwing at them very technical details of various routes and names of ports that they never heard of. So I presume the Americans agreed to something they didn't really understood what was agreed upon. And of course, I'm not sure they know exactly who is controlling what sanctions. Because the level of incompetence and arrogance in the current administration is staggering, as we know, and hence you wouldn't be surprised that those people don't even know what they're talking about.
Do you think this could be then a tactic from, I mean, by the sounds of it, maybe giving a little bit too much credit due, but a tactic to bring Putin at least a sellable victory to his people to end the war? or do you think it's potentially just hunting for that Nobel Peace Prize that he's so keen to get?
I think the Nobel Peace Prize is still there somewhere back in Trump's mind. Uh, I'm quite curious why the Russians are pushing so far for the Black Sea ceasefire, because uh, Russia is less dependent on foreign trade. As far as I know, the harvest of last year was quite poor in Russia. We know that potato prices is up by 70%. So actually, domestically produced foodstuffs are in shortage. The inflation is huge. So I can't quite see how the Russians will be pushing for exporting possibilities because they can hardly feed uh, the country themselves at the moment. This particular year has been pretty bad in terms of weather. So I kind of thinking maybe it's importing possibilities. They want to import more stuff, more food to keep the prices down. I've been telling that the butter price in England is the same as it is in Siberia, right? £2 a bar. But we do have a higher living standard than Siberian population. So inflation is really huge. So I presume they really want to import a lot of stuff instead of exporting it. And that probably makes it an interesting for them, an intriguing possibility for them to explore the Black Sea ceasefire route, because otherwise it does sound a little bit strange why they're pushing this so hard and also demanding all this lifting of sanctions, given that probably they are much more interested in the situation than the Ukrainians, and definitely more than Americans. So that's an intriguing and still unresolved puzzle.
Do you think that Putin could be pressing so hard in this particular area because, as you say, it's not somewhere that they have a particular buy-in at the moment, but it is an area to show Trump, look, we are pushing towards a peace just as much as the Ukrainians and just as much as you, perhaps.
I think you're absolutely right. They're throwing a little bone to Trump and his friends to say we are engaging and we are negotiating. Just things are complicated and there are technical details, and we have to create an expert group of this, an expert group of that. And of course, the Russian apparatchiks are very well at, and bureaucrats are very well versed in creating all this, dragging the feet and kicking the ball in the long grass. All of those metaphors are really particularly useful here, and I think that's what they're doing. I've also noticed that this month, in particular in March, the Russian attacks have increased twofold from February. So they are regrouped and are trying to push hard and faster against Ukrainian front lines as negotiations are ongoing. So presumably dragging their feet at the same time as trying to gain a little bit more advantage on the front line is the Kremlin strategy at the moment.
Do you think that it's a sustainable pace to be going at for Russia, considering, like you say, it's a doubling of efforts, and before they were already hemorrhaging losses and economy and all the rest of it?
What we've learned over the 3 years is that it's not the economy that's going to break the Kremlin's back, right? They're willing to sacrifice 1 million people, throwing them into the war, and they're willing to sacrifice a significant decline in living standards and quality of life and on the rest of it, because they think they can manage the unrest through the means of repression. The apparatus of repression is huge. There are millions and millions of riot police and various secret forces that obviously can crush any potential insurgency rebellion. Although, of course, when Prigozhin did it, nobody turned up. So there is a vulnerability in the region, but the regime believes that in terms of the economy, they can kind of survive it and they can endure it for another maybe year. President Putin's was addressing the Russian Union Alliance of the Industrialists and entrepreneurs just an hour before his famous phone call with President Trump. And in that address, he said that the Russian elites, business elites, should not expect lifting of the sanctions. They should be preparing to live with the sanctions forever. So it looks like he was giving them he wasn't giving them any hope, and that means that the Kremlin is effectively thinking that they can win the war of attrition, and they're willing to continue with the war of attrition for at least another year.
To go back briefly, you mentioned the phrase "dragging his feet," which is something Trump said about Putin a couple of days ago. Um, It is potentially the first, albeit minimal, signal that pressure could be applied to Russia from the American side of things. What do you think will take for Trump to turn on Putin, or at least begin to start putting pressure on Putin and Russia?
Well, if there are, I mean, there are several options. The Americans just walk away, as they did walk away from the North Korean negotiations about the North Korean nuclear weapons. When the going got tough, they just abandoned the talks and the situation as it is now. So I presume if it were a betting man, you would bet on them just walking away as the first, as the highest chance, highest probability, and I would put only small chance of Trump administration of turning the pressure on the Kremlin themselves. Because it looks to me that the strategy of the Trump administration is to save Russia and also make it stronger rather than weaker. The previous administration was saving Russia, but weakening it at the same time. But the current one wants to strengthen it for some reason. We can discuss why that is the case. But I think they're just effectively saving them and denying Ukrainian support. Ukrainians, the support that Ukrainians need is effectively playing for the enemy, and that is quite obvious. So I think 20% chance of Trump turning against Putin, but I think the highest probability is that they just walk away.
Do you think Trump could sell it, considering he said it would end in 100 days, and there's a lot of statements saying that Trump would look weak if he fails to bring any progress in this area? And also, I would love to hear why you think the Trump administration is trying to strengthen and save Russia and Putin.
It is intriguing what that during that horrible meeting in the Oval Office between President Zelensky, Trump, and the rest of them, Trump's concluding line was, "This will make a great TV." Uh, will Russian say victories in the front line make a great TV for American viewers? I'm not sure because the current opinion polls are turning in favor of Ukraine quite strongly. Yeah, most Americans believe Ukraine is an ally and Russia is an enemy. Most Americans believe Ukrainians need either the same level of support or more support, and only 31% believe that they need less support. So the majority of American population, an average American, is pro-Ukrainian and anti-Putin. And you know, given that Donald Trump is a celebrity TV personality, I wonder for how long he'll be able to ignore the public opinion. Of course, it is possible, but I think the headwinds will be quite strong. So there is a still chance that they will come to their senses. In terms of why they are saving Russia, it looks like we've learned from uh, a couple of international relations theorists which are connected to MAGA movement, the Make America Great movement, is that they're trying to pretend they're orchestrating some three-dimensional geopolitical chess of pulling Russia away from the People's Republic of China and in that way weakening their Pacific enemy and strengthening uh, the ties with Russia in some way, whether strategic or geopolitical or somewhat. So the official line is this kind of a clever reverse Nixon maneuver when Richard Nixon allegedly peeled away the Chinese from the Russians back in 1972, and that they believe that was the death knell of the communist regime. They think that if they orchestrate the reverse maneuver, that will get the same results. I do think that the theory is delusional and is based on misreading of the history. But also, I believe that even the theory is not delusional, it will not be possible to create such a maneuver because the Russian economy is entirely dependent on its largest neighbor and the largest economy that effectively been propping up Russia for the last 3 years.
In light of that, do you think there could be some play here, again, potentially giving a lot of credit to Trump, of attempting to turn one of China's allies, Russia, against them in bringing them into the fold of the West?
What we're learning from the Signal Gate, this scandal of American high officials using mobile phones to plan bombing campaigns overseas, is that the level of competence isn't that great, and the level of understanding of the situation on the ground isn't that great, and hence. And I'm afraid Donald Trump isn't Richard Nixon, and Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz isn't exactly Henry Kissinger. They're not going to write massive books of history of diplomacy, right? So as much as we can be critical of Nixon's Kissinger mental acumen, it was, I'm afraid, much higher than the current administration possesses, and therefore I'm not entirely sure that even if they try, it will be possible.
And if America were to walk away from the whole situation to try and save what face they could in that event, is Putin worried about the coalition of the willing, do you think?
Well, I presume because he's got a number of Trojan horses inside the European Union, the Hungarian government, the Slovak government, and also a couple of head of states in the Balkans, like President of Croatia. Uh, he's probably thinking he can derail European rearmament efforts, or at least postpone them or drag them on. My hope is that the new incoming Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, and President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and of course, British Prime Minister, alongside the Nordic and Baltic allies, will speed up the efforts of rearming Europe, but also effectively helping Ukraine to cover some of the losses that the Americans will produce by withholding their aid. Most of it is not possible to be replaced, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that will be the end to the war effort.
Even with today's meeting in Paris sort of being a solidification of last week's meeting in England of military leaders to firm up plans or preemptive plans or whatever the specific details were, you think Putin is not going to be too worried about it, given the relative pace that action seems to be taken already?
It's difficult to say, given that they're playing with poker faces, and it's difficult to understand how worried they are. The rhetoric on the Russian propaganda channel is very bombastic, uh, but the reality of it is obviously even just France and the UK have enough air power to control all of the Ukrainian airspace. And that will be a great achievement. Boots on the ground is fantastic for boosting morale, but I think the air and naval support will be much actually will bring much value added, given that Ukrainian air force is very weak and small, and is just been getting a few Western fighter jets. So air support and naval support around the Black Sea would be really, really great if the coalition of the willing really gets off the ground.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about? Any other questions that have come up to your mind in the last 25 minutes or so?
Well, it looks like there's been a lot of positive rhetoric coming from Europe and Britain and Norway, uh, but the problem, of course, is the 27 member states of the EU and the 30 plus member states of the NATO, outside, minus US. It's quite a lot of voices, and we're heading. We do have a lot of noise, and we don't have a strong signal. So the hopes of humankind lies on people in Brussels, and people coming to Brussels and to Paris and to London to really act much faster. They wasted 3 years of believing in myths and wishful thinking about either Harris presidency or Donald Trump not being Donald Trump. But now the facts of the matter is quite clear, and I think the bureaucrats, we need to speed up things. And this is really an emergency. We can't really go through the same procurement, through the same publishing stuff in the European Gazette, and then having a tender, an official journal, and having people then appealing to the courts, and then after 3 years you still haven't got a single bullet been produced. This is exactly what happened recently. So a new emergency procedures need new emergency measures, and I think the Europeans need to really, 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 and they are woken up, yes, but now they need to act.
Professor Vlad Mykhnenko, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Isaac. Thanks a lot.